Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, Welcome to the Goddamn Ice Cube, written by Blair Braverman. The subtitle is Chasing Fear and Finding Home in the Great White North. This is a very interesting memoir that the cover design is by Allison Saltzman, and the cover photograph is copyright Jeff Schultz, Alaska stock. Author photograph by Quince Mountain. Author photograph on the back cover. I bought this book used for $5. I don't know from where. This book is copyright 2016. This is the first Echo paperback edition published 2017. I had this book in 2019 when I was working at that one summer camp up in central New Mexico, so I had to have bought it relatively new, but still used. This is the title page. The copyright information says this was designed by Suet Chong, and the title page photography was by Tyler Olson, Shutterstock Inc. This book isn't too long. It's only about 270 pages. It is a book about the author, Blair Braverman, and her goals and her very unusual life. The back cover summarizes it pretty well. It says, by the time Blair Braverman was 18, she had left her home in California, moved to Arctic Norway to learn to drive sled dogs, and found work as a tour guide on a glacier in Alaska. So Blair Braverman leaves home out of high school to go to learn how to be a sled dog driver, and then goes to Alaska to find work in that field. The difficult part of this is that she is going into a niche field of recreation, and it's also kind of mostly a frontier in Alaska, a very male-dominated economy up there, a very male-dominated community, a very male-dominated situation she puts herself into. There's a lot of sexism that she has to fight. She has this pushback against everything she does. A lot of the guys up there are guys, almost fraternal in the way they communicate with each other. Women that are there are objects or just there long enough to find a guy to marry. That's their mentality. And she does meet some men that are actually decent people, but a lot of them are just frat bro-ish in their attitude. And she discusses that field. Recreation, and especially something up north, something wild, it's very few women in the field. And this is true at every level of recreation. Women are not as frequent in places where they are alone with a group of people that they're far from any communication services such as cell phone signals or satellite phones take a while to use. It's not as comfortable a situation, and she puts herself into it because that is what she wants to do. But she faces a lot of that animosity. She puts it very well at the opening paragraph of chapter 8. In Lillehammer, I was a student. At the Folkskool, I was a dog sledder. But in Alaska, I would never be anything but a girl. It didn't matter how many men's clothes I wore, how many weeks in a row I stayed on the ice, how well I cared for my dogs. Dan wouldn't let me forget it. I'd enter the kitchen tent to find him scrutinizing the veterinary care I gave my puppies, or mocking something he'd overheard me say to a tourist. He talked loudly to other guides about how I was too sentimental to work with the dogs or give tours. Once, as he escorted an older couple to my sled, I heard him say, "She's good at acting like she knows what she's doing. It's too bad you didn't get an experienced musher." I didn't believe the things he said about me, And I didn't think the other guides did either, but that didn't stop them from laughing along. Rather than confronting Dan, I became increasingly withdrawn. If I could be alone, fine. If I could be with the dogs, even better. But most human interactions made me cagey and brittle. I even came to resent the tourists, resent them for how much they admired me, and volunteered to trade my tours for the crap chores that nobody wanted, the outhouse pumping and snow shoveling that most mushers tried to avoid. The whole thing felt less like an adventure and more like an ordeal, so that it was hard to recall what I'd wanted here in the first place. In fact, I realized I was more miserable than I had ever been in my life. I had always been someone who woke up happy at the prospect of another day. Now I woke up dismayed at the prospect of having to leave my tent. And then, when there is another female musher there, in the same chapter she says this: "One day during an implausible hour that somehow combined a break in the clouds with a break in tours, Stacy went out to sunbathe in a bra and shorts. She invited me along, and on a strange impulse I took off my shirt and joined her. What good had it done me to dress modestly? My skinny body looked good, smooth and long, in a way it never had before and probably never would again. The men noticed. 'So that's what you've been hiding,' someone called. A few others, hearing voices, trudged out of their tents to come see. Stacy laughed and stretched her arms over her head. I laughed too, trying to copy her ease. One musher, who also worked as a photographer, took a picture of us. We grinned. 'The girls of Norris Glacier,' he said. 'Show me what you've got.'" A good way that relationship with that Dan kind of ends is there's another female musher named Rebecca who is working at the facility for the summer, but is not actually given a chance to go on a ride. So, due to some bad weather, the night before Rebecca would leave, some unexpected guests are stranded at the glacier and at the camp. Rebecca ends up being one-on-one with Blair. And Blair says, "I'm sorry the guys are so mean to you. I wish they weren't." And Rebecca replies, "What do you mean?" "You know, when they make fun of you, Jesus stuff, everything. They're just being guys. That's how they do things. But it shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't have to go home because of them." "I'm going home because I miss my family," Rebecca says. "They're meaner to you than they are to me," Rebecca said. "I mean, if I can say this, Dan is the worst. She told me how she'd met him at the beginning of the summer, before I'd arrived in Juneau, and he'd said all sorts of stuff about me. I was pretty nervous to share a tent with you, actually, after what I heard. Then I met you, and within 5 minutes I was like, what was he talking about? 'Cause you were so friendly." "No," I said, thinking. "That can't be. He still wanted us to be together." Rebecca didn't answer. I had the odd, sudden feeling that she was embarrassed for me. I thought, we were never happy. Neither of us. Of course. Her relationship with this experience on the glacier and with mushing in general isn't only defined by this one experience, this one toxic relationship she has with Dan, but it does impact a lot of her comfort and experiences. There are a lot of fun times she has during this. Her school that she goes to, and mushing in snow and making snow shelters, she writes about very fondly. She writes about the early days of her working at that camp, that one company, and she enjoys it. The end of chapter 8 is really where she feels that she has lost her opportunity to be comfortable in the North. As she says it, "For years afterward, Dan would maintain that I had changed, gained some new or darker side that was, as he once explained in a letter, without a doubt not beneficial to who you are. But the change Dan meant was less obvious. The fact that I no longer went limp and let him touch me. The fact that when forced to choose between the bitter protection he offered and the exhaustive work of shielding myself alone, I knew that I could not be with him. And yet the decision burned. The change Dan lamented was that I had started to trust myself. But the way I saw it, I had flunked out of the North. And this kind of depression of hers continues. She ends up going to Norway, and it's not as easy as it once had been for her. She does receive charity, but as she says it, the hotels in Norway are expensive, and just staying one night in one hotel would eat up a third of her summer's budget. And that's tough. She's on a limited budget, and she can't enjoy a country she loves as much as she used to. She had been expected to go with a group of Sami for a summer in the wilderness and do something like that, but they left 2 weeks early, and she knew that it would be nearly impossible to find them and one specific reindeer herd by herself. So on page 210, it really culminates as she is drinking with some friends, and there's a bachelor party, and the sailor pointed at me. "You," he said to the men, "she's American." The men looked at me and shook their heads, doubtful. "Say something in English," one of them suggested. "I'm American," I said in English. "I'm not from here." They scoffed. "No, really, I was born in California," I insisted, my American accent harsh against the smooth night. "I'm staying with Arild Christofferson," mispronouncing his name on purpose, the R's hard and unrolled. "In Mortenhals. I'm not from here at all." I had in my life pretended to be a Norwegian, and an experienced dog sledder, and a girlfriend, and an adventurer, and brave. Roles to prove my place, to show that I could belong. But tonight, when I could be whomever I wanted, I pretended to be myself. Blair Braverman, the Californian, sitting on Helge Jensen's boat, the least likely character of the bunch. After chapter 8, the bulk of the story is her learning to be comfortable with herself and finding friends and learning what a healthy relationship is, but also learning what healthy friendships are, what a healthy work environment is. It's all in the north, but it's not Arctic as she'd want it to be, or it's not dog sledding like she'd want it to be. It's some comfortable home that she finds with people. And so it comes all together in this one very simple comfort and happiness. She has a friend that is willing to travel overseas and find her and enjoy holidays with her. And that's a big change from where she was in the middle of the book, working on her own and working with that dog sledding company. Finally, in the afterword, she opens it with, 2 weeks after leaving Morton Halls, 2 days before Thanksgiving, I got an email from one of my old coworkers in Alaska. Mike and I had never talked much. He was quiet. But I'd always thought of him as one of the kindest souls on the glacier, committed to his wife and his dogs. He was an accomplished racer from a legendary mushing family. The other guides held him in high esteem. Now Mike had moved to Wisconsin, and his wife had just had a baby, so they were downsizing the kennel. He wanted to sell a small team of dogs, trained and ready, a mix of yearlings and veterans. A turnkey operation, he called it. And finally, she summarizes it this way. This is my life, for now. Waking up in a house that was built by the man I love against a field smooth with snow in a town of 800 at the edge of the North Woods, looking out of the window at my dogs stretching their delicate legs as they climb from their houses in the garden. Roosters and guinea hens calling the hour. Wisconsin will never be northern Norway, but here are Quince's roots, and here, for now, are mine. A place where I can be as tough as I want, but I don't need to be. I entered small races to start, 20, 30 miles with 6 dog teams, races that would qualify me for longer ones, 100 or 200 or 1,000 miles a few years out. The last race of the season was hardest, 42 miles in the dark and a good pool of mushers. My parents flew out from their new home in Oregon to cheer me on. We took the last mile at a full sprint, and as we crossed the finish line in 4th place out of 25, I thought, wait, too soon. We didn't belong here with the people and trucks and lights. We belonged back on the trail, running. We should turn around. The dogs, of course, knew better. Finishing a run meant time to eat, and finishing a race meant especially good food. Bear fat and beaver meat from the taxidermist, plus hot kibble soup to wash it all down. I took off their harnesses, and they leaned into me, tails thumping against my thighs. Quints scooped their food into metal dishes. The dogs settled in to eat. Their warm bodies steamed in the night. So it goes almost full circle. She leaves a home to find adventure in the great north, and then she comes and settles in a different home. She finds a way for her passion to be something she can live with and do as a hobby, do as a job, do as a profession. She uses connections with people that were good to her in Alaska to move herself forward. It's a book about finding herself and finding home and finding comfort and finding healthy relationships. Welcome to the Goddamn Ice Cube is an interesting book about a woman in a community that isn't as accepting or welcoming to her as it should have been, and her learning to overcome hardship to find a good place for herself. I paid $5 for this book, and honestly, it's worth it. I don't know that I ever would have paid for it full price. It does stand out on the bookshelves, but I'm rarely looking at nature writing in new bookstores. I'm usually going to new bookstores for, Barnes and Nobles and bookstores like that. I'm looking for fantasy or other books in different genres. Memoirs never really interest me new. So the back cover says biography and autobiography as the genre tagging. I wouldn't even look in those shelves, and it says it's $14.99. So I bought this book for effectively 33% its full price. And I would buy it used again. I'm not sure I would buy it new, or I would even notice it new. So, yeah. If any of this sounds at all like something you would want to read, I highly recommend you looking for this book. But overall, this is a really good book, and I've been holding on to it, waiting to review it and rant about it in March, as March is Women's History Month. And this is very new in content, very contemporary, but it fits very nicely with the other books that I've read. So yeah, my name is Wild Stag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.